Alright, it's been a while, but I hope you have all been well. The beginning footage that you saw was from the Rise Festival in Las Vegas. I went with my girlfriend Cindy during the early part of our 10-day trip to Sin City for the WSOP, and it was our first time setting off lanterns, and just gotta say it was an amazing experience that I highly recommend. Jumping into the poker, the first notable hand involves a $10 straddle from the small blind. Lucky Chances has implemented a new feature in the 3-5 game, in which you can straddle from any position except for the button. In this spot, there's also a cutoff post, and it rates a 35 from the hijack with Jack 10 offsuit. Only the small blind straddler calls, and we go heads up to a flop of King Jack 6 rainbow. Small blind checks, and with the second pair, checking back seems fine to try and navigate to showdown without bloating the pot. That said, in an effort to keep repping a strong range of hands, I see bet 40, and small blind makes the call. Turn up the 7 of hearts, and small blind checks again. This time I do decide to slow down and check back. River comes to 8 of clubs, and now small blind leads for 100. Bit of a weird spot, the turn and river being connected to the 6 make it feasible for my opponent to have 2 pair, assuming he calls flat with hands such as 6-7 and 6-8. All that in mind, his range of holdings can be pretty wide here, and I've played this hand poorly in the sense that I don't know where I'm at. And rather than put in a $100 guess, I'll save it for a better spot and let this one go. Next spot we are short-handed and I straddle from the cutoff. Low jack raises to 35, small blind calls, and I get to close the action and call with a 4-5 of spades. Three-ways to a flop of ace-ace-8 with a couple of spades, so I flop a flush draw and a running wheel draw. Small blind checks, low jack c-bets 60, I call, and now small blind puts in the check raise to 200. Low jack folds, and my hand is pretty problematic to continue, since my spades could be dominated. He could occasionally have me dead with the full house, and if he has an ace, I'm not sure what spades would be clean for me. I fold. Shortly after, there's a low jack straddle, early position calls, and I'm on the button with pocket jacks. I raise to 45, and I pick up 3 callers from the small blind, low jack straddler, and early position. We go 4 ways to a flop of 3-3 deuce with a spade draw, checks to me, and with this board texture, hands that will call a bet will probably be inelastic when it comes to sizing. As an example, if my opponents have a small to medium pocket pair or a flush draw, they'll probably call a larger bet as frequently as a smaller bet. That in mind, I put out a c-bet of 120. Could have probably gone a tad bit bigger, like 130. Anyhow, small blind in early position fold, and the low jack calls. Turn comes the 5 of hearts, putting up more draws. He checks, and I continue the same approach I had on the flop, and bet 275. He takes for a good amount of time, and ends up folding, and accidentally shows 6-9 of spades in the process. So he picked up straight equity on the turn, but decided not to keep fishing, and I'm pretty content with that result.
That turn's good for you.
I then decided to move over to the 5-10 game with an agreed upon $20 straddle. In this first spot, the $20 is actually in the big blind position, since the player is posting the straddle for missing the previous hand. So we're playing 520, and I raise to 60 from the hijack with ace-queen offsuit. Pick up 2 callers from the button and small blind, and we go 3 ways to a flop of 7-6-6 rainbow. Small blind checks, and I like a small c-bet here with all of my hands to keep my opponents on defense. I bet 70. Button folds, and small blind gives me the same look I used to get as a kid from the 7-Eleven clerk when I would steal hot Cheetos. He looks suspicious, but gives me credit for being an honest man, which I normally am, and he releases his hand. Just one more notable spot from this game, and it's pretty interesting. I raise a 70 from the small blind with ace-king offsuit, and both the big blind and straddler call. 3 ways to a flop of jack 3 deuce with 2 spades and a club. I check, big blind bets 120, straddler flats, and with my hand, I like a check raise here to rep over pairs, and there are a variety of turns that I can barrel on, namely spades and Broadway cards. I make it 400. Big blind doesn't think too long and puts in the call. Then the straddler ends up doing something unexpected and rips for about $3,000. Since I've got the ace of spades, it does rule out some strong draws, so he should theoretically be weighted towards value. As far as bluffs, it is reasonable for him to have 4-5 or 4-6 of spades, but that's about it I think. If this were heads up, I could level myself to call with ace high occasionally, depending on the type of opponent, but not in this situation. After I fold, big blind goes into the tank, and as he's thinking, the straddler makes another surprising move and shows his hand, which is pocket jacks for top set. Definitely a unique situation, and after getting shown the nuts, the big blind does still think it through for a bit, which indicates that he may have a draw, but ultimately lets it go, We end up rabbit hunting the remaining cards, which come with 7 of spades and an ace of hearts. Don't know if big blind folded a potential winner, but the straddler takes this one down. And while his play was unorthodox, it did earn the man $800 on the flop with pretty much no sweat, and can't fault that. Anyhow, that wraps it up for this session. I want to give a shout out to Mike, Jason, and Sean at the 5-10-20 game. All very good players and nice guys. Also a shout out to Connor visiting from Dallas, Texas, and all the friendly people that I met during my Vegas trip. Alright, back at it for more poker, but first just a couple of quick announcements. Next month on Wednesday, November 10th, I'll be co-hosting a meetup game at Lucky Chances with fellow vlogger Doug McCusker, who is based out of Sacramento. We'll be playing 3-3 no limit. The buy-in will be 100 to 500. The event will run from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. And I know we're in the midst of the WSOP, but if you're in town, we definitely look forward to mixing it up with you. To sign up in advance, please visit projectlock.com. There will be an event link to sign up. But yeah, looking forward to collaborating with Doug, not just because he's an all-around good guy, but because he's a winner, unlike the Sacramento Kings. Also, I'll be heading to Las Vegas to fire in a variety of events from November 14th to the 22nd, so that should be a fun round 2 of the WSOP. Okay, with the updates out of the way, the first interesting hand comes when cutoff raises to 20, and I defend from the big blind with deuce 3 of clubs. Heads up to a flop of king 4 deuce, all different suits giving me bottom pair and backdoor possibilities. I check call a $25 bet, and the turn comes a queen of clubs, giving me a flush draw. I check once again, and my opponent continues betting, this time for 40. I call again looking to drill a lucky clover on 5th Street. It comes a queen of diamonds instead. Action checks through, and my opponent wins with king jack offsuit. Next hand there's a cutoff raise to 15. I've got pocket 5s on the button, and play this one aggressively via a 3-bet to 50. Cutoff calls, we go heads up to a flop of king queen 4 with a couple of diamonds and a heart. Cutoff checks, and this is a good board to rep strong hands, so I c-bet 50, and he calls. 4th Street comes to ace of clubs, and he checks again. Given the approach that I've taken thus far, I've set myself up for a clear turn bet. Can I rise to the occasion like the start of this video? Nope, I check back and we go to a river of a 7 of hearts. He checks, I check, and he wins with queen 10 of clubs. Not too long after, we were playing winner straddles, which functions a bit like PLO with a rock. Low jack straddles, under the gun min raises to 20. It gets me in the cutoff with ace 3 of spades, and I raise to 75. Small blind cold calls, and under the gun thinks a bit before, jamming for about 500. I can't continue but small blind calls, and the board runs out queen high, small blind has pocket 10s, and that is no good as under the gun has ace queen offsuit to take this one down. Next spot there's an under the gun straddle, first act calls, and I'm in the hijack with pocket queens, and I raise to 50. Button an early position call, and we go 3 ways to a flop of 6-4-3 with a club draw. Early position checks, I c-bet 100, button calls, and early position folds. Heads up to a turn of a jack of clubs, so not the best card bringing in the front door flush. I check, and my opponent on the button jams for 362 effective. I go well into the tank as I've got a variety of thoughts running through my head. Could he have a flush? Yes. Could he have a naked ace of clubs? Possibly, but less likely. Could he have some pair plus straight draws or small to medium pocket pairs that contain a club? Yes. And after some deliberation, I make what I feel is a pretty tough call, and the river comes the ace of hearts, and my opponent mucks. Lock this one up with the queens. Next hand there's an under the gun straddle once again. Low jack raises to 30, and it's deja vu as I've got pocket queens and the hijack. This time I decide to play this one tricky and flat, and the cutoff and button call as well. 4 ways to a flop of king 10-6 with a couple of hearts and a diamond. Low jack checks, I check, cutoff bet 60, button calls, low jack folds, and I take the nitty around this one and fold as well. Last spot there's a hijack straddle. I raise a 35 from the low jack with 9-10 of spades. Button and hijack call, and we go 3 ways to a flop of ace 9-8 that contains a club draw. I check, hijack checks, button jams for 57. With second pair and possibly the best hand, I call. Unfortunately, hijack calls as well, which reduces the likelihood of me having the best hand. Looking to improve my hand on 4th Street. It doesn't come as it's the 4 of clubs. Action checks through, and we go to river of a queen of clubs, further cementing that I rarely have the best hand. Action checks through. I show my 9-10, which is no good, It's hijack as ace deuce offsuit, button mucks, and hijack scoops this one. Alright, it's been a while since saying these words, but just finished a session here at Lucky Chances. I played last night as well, but didn't have enough hands to make a full vlog. So came back today. As for the results, I got into yesterday's 3-5 game for 1,300, out for 1133, so book a loss of 167. Then played the 5-10-20, was in that game for 3,600, out for 3,155, so minus 445. And as for today, I was in for 1,300 again and out for 1,751, so book a win of 451 today. And that's gonna pretty much wrap it up for this one. For those of you sticking around and watching the vlogs, I really appreciate it. I haven't posted as regularly as I used to. I've just been busy with some other things. I did spend 8 to 10 days in Las Vegas recently for the WSOP. And for the first time ever going to Vegas, I played all tournaments. I didn't play any cash games. I ended up cashing twice, but I did fire quite a few bullets in a variety of events, which I'll put on the screen. I did net an overall loss for the trip, but had a good time and definitely have plans to go back in November, as well as some other things that might come up in November as well. So as always, I really appreciate y'all sticking with me, and I'll see you in the next video.